Good morning and welcome back. So I've had a couple of synchronicities the past couple of days. I'm very excited to share this with you. This is a quote in a book by Betty Kovacs, and yeah, it really speaks to what I have been talking about for a long time, which is what I feel is the real significance and importance of symbolism to this particular time. That's why I talk about dreams and fairy tales so much. So in this quote, it's a little bit long, but I think you'll appreciate it to hear it. So she starts out by saying Carl Sagan understood that the hallmark of a successful, long-lived civilization may be the ability to achieve a lasting peace among the several brain components. And then she goes on to say, a crucial tool in achieving and maintaining this peace is symbolic mythic language, because it has the capacity to communicate with and activate all of the various components of the mind. It is our first language, the language of the sensuous world, of instinct, feeling, memory, dreams, and visions. It's the language of concrete images that can awaken us to the multifaceted nature of inner and outer realities. And it is the language of myth. Every culture has symbolic stories it tells itself about itself and its place in the universe. These cultural myths reflect our thought systems and belief systems. They reveal much about who we are and the choices we make. Thus, they mirror back to us our willingness to subscribe to limitation or to claim our potential creativity. So you've been hearing me talk. It's a theme I talk about a lot. A couple of points there. One is about symbolism and how important I feel it is. That, and I've often mentioned the movie Arrival, which really reiterates that idea, is that it has importance. And the other thing is also with regard to the right brain is how creativity is rooted in the right brain, and that we're so conditioned to operate out of the rational, literal, logical left brain that we can't resolve situations that we've never experienced before in a creative way, in a new way, because our mind can only judge situations and experiences and come up with solutions based on the past and what's already been experienced and what's been known. So when we encounter things that are unfamiliar and that we don't know about, that's when we need to access the right brain in order to come up with new solutions. A lot of scientists and innovators and inventors, a lot of them got information from the right brain or from the dreams or from a vision. And that is often how they solved problems when they were at the front edge of a new frontier. Like, because you couldn't depend on the past in order to go forward. And so it's that part of the brain that actually serves us, especially at a time like ours, where we are shifting. And she called this the fifth renaissance that we're in. She went on to say about how these times historically, the past 5 times that we've been in one of these kind of renaissance periods, that what ended up happening was there was this pushback and a repression of it all. And so as I talked about last week, I feel like that's what we're seeing now in our culture. So the idea is not something outside of us is going to save us. Something outside of us is the answer. That the answer is inside of us. And the more of us that reclaim this other way of thinking and this other way of operating, this other way of seeing, it adds richness, depth, meaning, purpose to life in a way that our left brain just doesn't. Our left brain is literal, logical, rational. And so it's really what makes life rich. And I've talked about it in a lot of the fairy tales, in Excalibur, in a lot of myths and fairy tales are addressing specifically this situation. So coincidentally, I happened to decide yesterday that I would talk about the fourth task in the Psyche and Amor story, the fourth initiatory task that Psyche has to face. So, once again, Psyche is the Greek word for soul. So, in this story, what happens is the people have stopped worshiping the divine feminine in Aphrodite, and they have neglected her temples. They are not worshiping. It's their temples are falling into disrepair. So they're no longer paying any attention to the divine feminine, but instead they have turned to Psyche, who is the most beautiful third daughter of the king, and they have come to they're going to her house and they're worshiping her, and they're leaving gifts for her because they see her as the incarnation of the divine feminine, Aphrodite, in physical form. And so when she finds out about this, she is really angry. She is very upset, not with the people, but with Psyche, and she wants to take it out on her. So what's important about this story, which I've mentioned before, is that it actually is showing us that this is a pivotal moment historically when the divine feminine is sliding into the unconscious, that the attention of the people is coming off of the divine, the immaterial, and is now being shifted to the material. They're looking at the physical form of a human and saying, this is what we worship, not the divine feminine. Now, as we've also talked about, that the things that we typically associate with the feminine have been repressed and rejected. So that kind of seems like a contradiction. But the way that I see it is they're looking to women or the feminine as being a replacement of the feminine in that regard, not to worship her, but in a sense, like, there's all this weight being put on the feminine is to be perfect, to be a particular way, to not have any flaws, and right, that would be like wanting the divine to be in the form, as opposed to acknowledging the perfection of what is, not that it has to meet a particular like left brain standard for what beauty is or what it looks like, but actually being able to transcend that and see the beauty that's in all. And that is a big key to this fourth task, which we're going to go into. So what happens is when Aphrodite finds out that everybody's worshiping Psyche, then she wants her son, who is Amor, the god of love, to take his arrow and make her fall in love with the vilest creature on earth. But instead what happens is he falls in love with her by accidentally pricking himself with his arrow, and then wants her for his wife. So the father goes to the Oracle of Apollo because his daughter has no suitors. His other two daughters, who aren't as beautiful, get married and go off and live their lives. But his youngest daughter, because she's so elevated, like, no mortal man feels like they can relate to her. So no one approaches her and wants to marry her. So the father's like, what am I going to do? And the oracle says, take her to the highest mountain, dress in funeral attire, and then sacrifice her to the dragon. And so that's what they do. They take her up, take her to the top of the mountain, sacrifice her to a dragon, but a gentle wind picks her up and deposits her on the meadow below, where she falls asleep. When she wakes up, she notices there's a beautiful palace there. She goes into the palace and she's tended to by all of these invisible helpers. And that night, as she's laying in bed, Amor comes, and she's initially kind of freaked out, but then he says, he's her husband, but she can't ever look at him. She has to stay in the dark. So I'm not going to give you all the details of the story because that would take up all of our time. But what ends up happening is she's not supposed to look at him, but then she does. She takes a lantern and she lights it in the night, and she looks at him and she sees, oh my God, my husband is the god of love. And she accidentally spilled a drop of oil on him. He wakes up and he flies away. And so what this represents is that, you know how they say, like, you can't look directly at God. Like that's like this thing that you see across cultures. And so she doesn't have the consciousness. She doesn't have the consciousness to stay there, to stay in that place of actually seeing who her partner is. So she, in a sense, she has to kind of let go of that and then make the journey in order to be able to embody that consciousness. So what happens is she tries to find him because, you know, he's like amazing and he's her husband. So she goes on this quest to find him. Eventually she gets directed. They're like, you have to just go face Aphrodite head on. You just have to face it. Like, you know, you have to go deal with this yourself. So she ends up with Aphrodite, and Aphrodite says she's going to give her these tasks. So the story kind of says that she's giving her the task to try and kill her, but she's not trying to technically kill her, because what she's trying to do is shift her, as you hear me talk a lot about, from the ego. So it's, you know, some people say killing the ego, but it's not a thing, so you can't really kill it, but it's shifting from the ego to the soul. So she gets these 4 tasks in order to shift her out of her old identification. So what happens when you're getting tasks in your life and my life to shift out of the way that we see ourselves is we have to go up against our limitations. These challenges have to take us to the precipice of what we know, of what we're comfortable with, and push us so that we actually confront these limitations that we have for ourselves, this conditioned limitations, and so that we push beyond them and say, oh, I'm more than that. Oh, that perceived limitation actually wasn't a limitation. It was something I was believing was, but wasn't. And this is what happens to Psyche. She goes from feeling like a victim with each task. She feels like a victim. I can't do this. And then she has to go through it. And she gets help every time. And so she completes each task, which of course upsets Aphrodite even more. It just makes her more PO'd. So finally she gets to the 4th task. And in the 4th task, she's told that she needs to go to the underworld and get a box of beauty. Now, no mortal can go to the underworld and come back alive. I don't know of any other stories that has happened. It's possible that it has, but I don't know of mortals going down and coming out alive. Well, maybe there were some. Okay, so I'll set that thought aside for the moment. But she decides she's going to kill herself, like she does every single time. I cannot do this. There's no way. There's no way I can do this. I'm going to climb to the top of this tower and I'm going to throw myself out of the window. So she climbs to the top of the tower. The tower says, like, every time she decides she's going to kill herself, there's some kind of intervention. And the tower says, you're going to quit right before you're ready to, like, get the prize. Like, don't quit now. You're almost there. So the tower tells her step by step, these are the steps that you need to take to go down, to get the box of beauty, and to come out alive. Now, the one thing you need to remember is once you get that box of beauty and you come out of the underworld, don't look in the box. So she has all the details. The tower tells her. So the tower represents a connection, right? It's vertical. We've talked about this before, like the cross. The cross is the vertical and the horizontal coming together. So here we have just the vertical. So in what she does essentially is she's going up. And so she's going up to connect to source consciousness, to the stillness, to the silence, in order to be able to make the descent. So this is what is required for us. This works because this is not just a story. This is like telling us, how do we navigate through the underworld in order to understand deeper truths? And so we have to connect up, and then we begin the descent. So the tower is a central axis, a vertical, linking the above and the below, as we've talked about before. It's like a sturdy, strong, right? We've talked about this in terms of like a pillar of like with Lot's wife. A pillar is a solid kind, and a tower is like a very solid thing to connect to. Now, you could say that there could be a little bit of um, connection here to something like Mary Magdalene, right? Because the tower is would be significant in something like that. So there could be an element of that connection there. This would story would, I guess it wouldn't predate her. And so when this story was written, it wasn't. So she would have already been here and gone. Anyway, it also would represent that inner stillness of the soul that's created through the challenges. So each challenge is building that inner stability, which you've heard me talk about, like that center, that new solid foundation. And a tower needs a really strong foundation to go high. Just like a tree needs a really deep root system, the depth of the root system determines the height of the tree. So connecting to and rooting in the above, inner source, because I say this, but really it's this, inner source, in order to make the descent below. So the instructions for the descent were to go into the underworld, which represents the unconscious or the inner realm. Take 2 barley cakes and put 2 coins in your mouth, on your tongue, and 1 barley cake in each hand. So she's supposed to maintain, so these are the instructions as she's doing, I'm telling you kind of as she's going. So she takes the 2 barley cakes in her hand, the 2 coins in her mouth, and she's supposed to go in silence. She's not supposed to speak or anything else until she gets down to Persephone. And so she's to maintain silence as she passes the lame man who is driving a mule with sticks. And what happens is he's going to drop some of his sticks in order to ask her for some help. Now imagine you go by this lame guy and he's dropped some sticks. And so, honey, can you give me a little hand here and help me pick up these sticks? Of course you'd be like, right, sure, no problem. Absolutely not. Do not help him. Maintain your silence. Don't say anything. Don't do anything. Just keep going. So that's a challenge. This is what it's telling us. So it's not just like her in the story. This is about us. So he's the wounded masculine, right? With a foundational issue, a problem standing, a problem with locomotion, right? So a wounded masculine character here. So use 1 coin to cross the river. So the ferryman would take 1 of the coins and then take her across the river that separates the living from the dead. While she's in the boat crossing the river, there's a decomposing man in the water who's going to try to get in the boat. Once again, do not help him. Do not let him in the boat. Maintain your silence. Keep going. Don't stop. Let what's dying die. Do not try to rescue. Do not try to save. And this is kind of challenging when you're on this journey, to not want to like reel people back in, to let them go. And there are ways to release people when you're shifting consciousness. And it's so funny because when I work with people, sometimes I'm like, okay, I'll tell you how to do this, but the one thing you have to remember is don't reel them back in, because when it happens, it can happen in a way that makes you look like the bad guy, you feel like the bad guy, or you start to feel lonely and you're like, you want them back. And I'm like, if you are doing this, then you need to let go and let them go. And I've helped people before and they're like, yeah, reel them back in. I can't do this. So it's a challenge sometimes. Anyway, so let what's dying die. Don't interfere with the women spinning. Now, we talked about this with regard to Sleeping Beauty, which is the fate that represents fate, spinning of fate. And this is where that lovely S word comes in, which is surrender, letting go of control. Don't get involved. Just let, they're going to try and entice you to come over. Don't go. Silence. Keep going. Then, these are traps set by Aphrodite. The tower warned her. They're traps. Don't fall for it. They will plead with you to help them. You must ignore them. They're distractions designed to keep you in the underworld. And if you drop one of those barley cakes, one in each hand, then it's all over. You can't do it. So let go of what's done, the victim masculine energy, and the parts of her that are dying, which are the ego parts. The cakes are to distract the three-headed Cerberus dog. And that would represent like confusion, which way to go. Three directions, pulling in different directions, right? That would be being in the head and distracted by thinking, which causes confusion. This is all about the feminine regaining what has been lost. Each task is working towards reclaiming those parts of ourselves that are in the unconscious, that have become unconscious, that were rejected, repressed, ignored. And that's what's happening here as well. So staying focused, not getting distracted by thoughts of going this way and that way, or projects, 10 projects at a time or anything. She gives one of the cakes to the dog, and then it lets her pass through the gate to Persephone's palace. So Persephone is queen of the underworld. And what I was thinking about was next week I would go into the story of Persephone. So I'm not going to really go into her really deep here, but she is the goddess that lives in the underworld, but comes back in the spring and returns life to the world above. You can see how she would be correlated with a lot of stories other than just the Psyche and Amor story, because she has her own story with Demeter and Hades, and she also is connected really in not an overt way, but to a story like Excalibur, King Arthur, and how there's a wasteland, right? When the feminine is missing, when there is no feminine. And the answer to that was finding the Grail, which was in the unconscious in that story, which I've gone over before. And here, that's what she represents. So if you think about it, Psyche, the soul, has to make a descent in order to visit the queen of the underworld, the queen of rebirth. Isn't that neat? So she was told, sit on the ground, only eat a piece of bread, nothing more. Ask for the box of beauty, ask her to fill the beauty for Aphrodite, put the beauty in the box, and then reverse the steps to get out. They said, don't linger and don't eat too much, because that's how Persephone got trapped in the underworld, was because she ate pomegranate seeds. And now she can't come out whenever she wants to, but there was a negotiation done, and she gets to come out for half the year, but has to stay down there for the other half of the year. The unconscious can be fascinating, and we can get drawn into it and get disconnected from life in general. So it's important to be aware of that and to not stay in there too long, just to kind of go and get what you need and then come back out again. She asks for the box of beauty to be filled, with beauty, and she repeats the way in on the way out. And then, as I said, the final instruction, don't look in the box. You want to guess what she did? If you didn't hear me talk about this already, she looked in the box. Now, why is this important? Some people say, well, that was a regression. She shouldn't have done that. But I say that if what she was transforming was victim consciousness, then what she had to understand was the truth of herself. What was the truth of who she was? What was the truth that's inside of her? And that truth is that the divine is inside of her. She couldn't look on Amor. She couldn't see him because she saw herself as inferior and as mortal. And the sacred marriage cannot happen, as you've heard me talk about, unless there's equality. So what does she have to see inside of herself is the truth of who she is. she has to see the divinity that lives inside of her. And so when she opens the box, she falls into a death-like sleep. And that's exactly what it was, a death-like sleep. That means that she falls asleep, she dies to the vision of herself, the view of herself, the awareness of herself as a human and mortal, and becomes aware of the immortal. And this, when she opens the box, it brings Amor out of his hiding. And he comes in and he wipes the sleep from her eyes and puts it back into the box. And again, some people say, oh, he rescued her, but he didn't, because it represents that now she can become aware. Now she can look at him. She can see him in the broad light of day. That means a transformation has happened. So that's my perspective, that she's been transformed. The soul has awakened. It's become enlightened. And then they go on to have a wedding and with all the gods, and everybody attends. And she gets to drink the nectar of immortality. So she becomes a goddess in her own right, the soul. So this is a story about the soul. And as I was saying at the beginning about how it was showing this moment, this critical moment where Aphrodite is going into the unconscious in order for the soul to emerge. That was why it was happening, because it's, shown as, she's mad and she's going to initiate the soul, but it's not that she's mad and it's going to initiate the soul because she wants to punish it. It's because this has to happen. The gods were removed. They were living on Mount Olympus. They were above the people. They were separated. Sound familiar? Our God up in heaven, in Christianity, separated. There's this distance between us. And so we're in this transformative time where the divine is going from outside to being recognized as inside. Persephone box, which was so interesting, I just came across this, is part of the, I don't know how to say it correctly, Eleusinian mysteries. Yeah, so that means that this box is, I've talked before about seeing this story of Psyche and Amor because the guy who wrote it, Apuleius, was initiated in the Isis mysteries. And here he uses specifically the box of Persephone, which was part of the rites and the rituals that they did in the Eleusinian mysteries. And therefore, it is a critical element to awakening. It's a critical element to awakening. So what could that be? I'd be really interested in what you think. That beauty has value that our culture doesn't recognize. It sees beauty and it appreciates beauty, but it doesn't recognize the deeper value of it. How might we understand this a little bit better? I just happen to have a poem. And so because she's also the goddess, the beauty comes from Persephone. And when she's in the underworld, it's winter above. And when she comes out of the underworld in spring, beauty returns because the flowers bloom, everything changes. You know that. I mean, like when spring comes, the birds are singing, like they know something's different. Like everything knows something's different. And that beauty comes back. And so in something even like Excalibur, where there's the wasteland, then the only way to heal the wasteland is to find the Grail. And when in the movie, when Parsifal gets the Grail and brings it back to the king, and the king sips from the cup, what happens is spring comes. That's the way the movie shows it. It's like spring returns. And that shows the correlation. Again, so this is an outer reflection of the inner. And that's why I talk so much about how important it is for us to begin to do this work inside in order to change what's happening outside. Because a lot of times you could perceive the world we're living in as a wasteland, right? Where so much has been stripped from it, so much is being taken from the world, and not recognizing the beauty, not valuing the beauty, not seeing the world and nature as sacred and a part of us. We are nature in physical form. So this book from my other book of poetry, this poem from my other book of poetry is called Beauty. Turn your gaze into the sky. Lift your arms and you will fly. Beauty lifts our souls above mundane concerns to realms of love. Let your spirit lead the way. The path of destiny unfolds each day. Meet your life within your heart and let yourself fulfill your part. And you will enter a magical place where enchantment's light can warm your face. A world where wholeness isn't a dream, but the reality of a life that isn't what it seems. Where you are and what you believe are determined by awareness, so do not grieve. Transform your mind and change your face. This world is made of love and filled with grace. The reason that poem came to me as connected to this was because of that one stanza. Beauty lifts our souls above mundane concerns to realms of love. And that, in addition to that initial quote I read from Betty Kovacs about creativity and the brain, it's returning. When you're in the left brain, it's the wasteland, when that's all you have access to. But when you add that right brain in, you change the wasteland and bring life back to it. We saw this in not only Excalibur, but also in The Wizard of Oz. It's the same journey. As I've said, the same journey over and over again in one story after another, in these archetypal stories, and we're here to transform this in ourselves. So that's it for today. Next week I'm going to talk about Persephone and the myth of the underworld and how that connects into this. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And I have started a Patreon newsletter. If you want to see my writings and stuff like that, you can, I'll drop the link below the video and you can sign up. It's for free. You can sign up for a paid plan or a free plan, whatever floats your boat. Thank you for joining me. Have a great rest of your day and take care.